Janjo bardo dane jamzo je dage jenzo je zena je roma je sanje roma roi sanje je dan je jonan roi janjo bardo dane jamzo je dage Janjo bardo dane jamzo je dage janzo jeme zanam je rola benjer zanje roma jo zemjen damje dewa dan debe jodan dembar je dunga don dunga je jodan rabar je dunga mebe dev no me rabar je nyering jadan yadan rabe danyam jembola nebar jo che semjen damje dewa Devi Jodan Dambar Jaji Dungar Dam Dungar Ji Jodan Ramar Jaji Dungar Mebe Dewa Dam Dame Ravar Jaji Nyering Jada Nyadan Ram Danyam Jambola Neba Joji Zanjan Damje Dewa Dam Devi Jodan Dambar Jaji Dungar Jijulan Ravar Jaji Dungar Mebe Dewa Damba Dambe Ravar Jaji Yering Jada Nyadan Rave Danyam Jambola Neba Joji Dada Zenjan Tamje Lo Chuzu Rovara Jinja Londo Zo Jalanda Rovara Jinja Londo Zo Lamjoba Sovara Jinja Londo Zo Juba Yeshe Sun Java Jinja Londo Zo Dada Zenjan Tamje Lo Chuzu Rovara Jinja Londo Zo Jelanda Dogwara Ginger Londo Zo Londrova Sawara Ginger Londo Zo Yishe Darwa Ginger Londo Zo Dada Zenjan Tamje Lo Chuzo Dogwara Ginger Londo Zo Jelanda Dogwara Ginger Londo Zo Londrova Sawara Ginger Londo Zo Juba Yishe Sun Jodwa Jinja Lam Do Me Mai Ge Zara Dom Bo La Ya Se
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you all. We are concerned here with the text from the Guru Vidyadhara cycle of Teaching Barway Dorje that is called Clear Guidance on the Generation Stage. And this is one of three. We would call them guides or commentaries, but they're actually part of the treasure, the Dharma itself, that we still have. These are the root of the preliminaries, this one, the clear guide, and then the ultimate completion stage. There were no doubt additional guides to different aspects of the many practices that originally made up this cycle. But much of the written material was lost during the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s and following. Thank you. So we have, fortunately, the three most important guides to supplement the liturgies themselves. The first of these, the Root of the Preliminaries, which is printed in English in the same book, this little white book, as the Clear Guide, is actually the source in the Dharma for both the liturgy and the instructions concerning the preliminaries. And this text, the Root of the Preliminaries, was taught here by Barway Rinpoche many years ago, and detailed instruction on the preliminary practices themselves was also given by Lama Yeshe again many years ago. Enough time has passed that this building didn't exist when these things were first taught. They were taught at the neighboring property. The second text is what its title implies, a clear guidance on the generation stage common to the four chitta sadhanas or heart sadhanas of the ocean of Vijayanagar Gurus. And Barway Rinpoche taught this again many years ago. That time this building existed. He taught it in what is now the stupa shrine room. Sometimes used to be called the Tibetan Language Library, and the other one was called the English Language Library. I think we now call them the stupa shrine and the statue shrine, but I'm not sure. Anyway, Rinpoche taught this, but he taught it very quickly and didn't elaborate or particularly unpack many of the references contained in the text. Because at that time, the Sangha was very new to all this. And these explanations of the outer, inner, and secret meaning of each and every aspect of sadhana practice, starting with taking refuge and on through, was more a source of bewilderment and almost dismay for people. Well, many years have gone by since then, and therefore several of us thought, including Lama Yeshe, that it would be a good idea for me to go over this text that Rinpoche presented and provide the information, the references that are hinted at or briefly stated. The issue that we face is very simple. It's one of context and available information. For the sake of its survival through time, and also because the Sangha to whom Guru Rinpoche originally gave this teaching were advanced practitioners, it's quite brief in terms of detailed explanation of the various things to which it refers. And its brevity is based on the assumption of a great deal of prior training and prior information. Well, at this point, many of you have received a great deal of the training, but have not been given easy access to the information. So our purpose, starting with this weekend and whenever I'm able to continue, is to go through the text in more detail slowly so that you can actually make practical use of the information that the text contains, because you now have a little bit more of a context for it than we did 15 or so years ago. So I'll give you page numbers in the English book that is available here. We're starting on page 29. Clear guidance. The Tibetan is Trati. Tras, of course, seems to be, it's not spelt as subtle. It's spelt as like the Sanskrit word pra, which is an intensifier. And it may indicate maybe an abbreviation of prasena, which means clear sight or divination. So that's why we decided to translate it clear. But basically, it has the connotation of a detailed, step-by-step and practically oriented guide to these practices. The generation stage common to the 4 Chitta sadhanas. Now, those of you who are familiar with the 10th day Guru Rinpoche practice that is done here will be aware of the fact that it is called a combined sadhana or combined practice because it is a combination of 4 separate practices, the outer, inner, secret, and very secret Guru Rinpoche, or Guru Vidyadhara, I should say, practices of this cycle. Originally, those 4 existed as separate liturgies with separate visualizations. They were lost, again, during the Cultural Revolution. What has been preserved is the combined sadhana, along with the empowerment for the combined sadhana, and as I said, these 3 guides and the preliminary practices and various other bits and pieces of liturgy. But when it says common to, it means that the stages that are going to be gone through in this text are stages in all of these practices. So you will recognize these as stages in what we practice on the 10th day. You will also recognize these as stages in other practices of this tradition, including Yamantaka, Kila, and the Kachari. So the information that is given here will have very wide application to the practices that are done. Now, some of it will be concerned with ritual, which means that some of it will be more applicable to the elaborate ritual practices that we normally do as a community on the 10th and 25th days for the week before Losar and at other times, also including the subtle essence Vajrasattva. But not all of this is concerned with ritual, and therefore you will find aspects of this, the teaching contained in this text are very readily applicable to and therefore useful for your daily practices of the generation stage. The text begins, the following instructions, combining all the stages of profound and clear guidance, were taught for the benefit of those who wish to take the Vidyadhara Gurus as their essence yidam and diligently practice the external, internal, secret, and very secret mind sadhanas. Now, to deal with this issue, once and for all for this weekend anyway, for those familiar with the 10th day practice, the outer mandala or the outer practice is basically the external mandala that you visualize, centered on he who overpowers all that appears and exists. In that practice, the inner mandala is the one inside your head, the secret mandala, the one in your throat, and the very secret mandala of Dharma, the one in your heart. So that is the way in which the combined practice combines literally all of these four aspects or levels of practice. The text then begins by describing the occasion and circumstances on which and under which Guru Rinpoche gave this teaching. In this sense, this text very much parallels the stages of the path teaching that Lama Toto has been going through for several years. The only difference is that the stages of the path teaching describes not only the generation stage, but also the practices leading up to that and the completion and great perfection practices as well. This teaching is primarily focused on the generation stage itself. Namo Mahaguru Vajraye, homage to the great Vajra Guru. In the male wood dragon year, the glorious Guru of Uddiyana, Padmakara. Uddiyana, which originally meant to soar or to fly through the sky, and still does actually in Urdu, which is the language of that part of the world, was probably what is now Swat in Pakistan. It was we would say a hotbed or breeding ground of Tantric Buddhism. Guru Rinpoche first appeared there under circumstances that will be described in our text. Because he was adopted into the royal family, he's often given the name of the country. At that time, Uddiyana was its own country. And so therefore he's sometimes called Uddiyana or Ujjain, but he was the Guru of Uddiyana. Padmakara, who knows all within the three times, remained in the samadhi of pure luminosity at the great place of accomplishment, Shotu Tidro. Shotu Tidro is still a pilgrimage site in, I believe, central Tibet. The self-arisen central feast hall of the glorious Heruka, where matrikas and dakinis gather spontaneously. Now, when we describe these places of practice, we call them the great fortress of this and the great palace of that. When you actually visit them, although in many cases they have monasteries and retreats that have been built there, they're actually caves that are in some cases large and in some cases not that large. One of the most famous of these is Yanglusha in Nepal, where Guru Rinpoche realized both Vajraheruka and Kila. And when I visited, I don't know if you can get in there now. You could in the 80s when I went there, and then you couldn't. I don't know how it is now. But it was very small. And so you could stick your head, as I did, of course, into where Guru Rinpoche stuck his head in the ceiling and stick your hands into where he stuck his hands in and so on. But it was very, very small. It was the size, basically, of a broom closet. And what made these places glorious was the accomplishment, of course, that occurred there. The Dharma king Trisong Detsen, the prince Mutrit Sempo, most of the ministers with their retinues, such as the Yogin Sanjay Yeshe, that's Nupchen Sanjay Yeshe, of whom Barway Dorje is the rebirth. Barway Dorje, Yeshe Yong, Vairochana, Soga Lapal, Tingzin Zompo, Jana Kumara, and Rinchen Cho, I, Sojal. So the text was written down by Yeshe Sojal, basically as a transcript of Guru Rinpoche's teachings. Buddhist scripture is all transcripts, for the most part, transcripts and narratives. Thus have I heard at one time the Blessed One was dwelling at such and such a place and said this to such and such people. And so it is, according to interpretation, either written down by someone who was there or written down later based on an oral tradition coming from those who were there. But like the Buddha's sutras and tantras, this is a transcript of a teaching by Guru Rinpoche. I, Sojo, and noble ladies such as Tashi Chiden, Shokaza, Nonsupa Jijomu, Chunema, Meto Drunma, Gyamtso, and Yeshe Drunma, created an elaborate Gano Chakra on the 10th day of the monkey month and offered it in the Guru's presence. Each of these individuals mentioned, including these women, has their own story. And we could go on about that, but I think that we'll let that go for now. Tashi Chidran, among them, was a Bhutanese princess. At that time, of course, the country of Bhutan wasn't called Bhutan, but it was, there. And she was Guru Rinpoche's disciple when he became his disciple when he went there. On that occasion, Guru Rinpoche arose from samadhi and accepted the food and drink offered to him. He spoke to the yogins and yoginis of Mahayana family and bestowed many instructions. At that time, Kunzang Yeshe offered the necklace known as blazing golden turquoise, which he had worn while serving as a minister to the Dharma king, to Guru Rinpoche as a mandala. He performed 9 full prostrations and then knelt down with his palms joined and said, Kyeho, Guru Rinpoche, you are in nature the embodiment of all victors of the 3 times. Now, this statement that Guru Rinpoche is the embodiment of all Buddhas, of past, present, and future, is going to come up again and again in this text. It has both a general and a specific meaning. In general, for any practitioner, your root guru, no matter who they may be, is the embodiment of all Buddhas of the 3 times. This is not a matter of a fanatic belief, nor is it a matter of trying to convince yourself that it's true. It's true for a very, very simple reason. If your guru is qualified, that means that they can transmit to you, somehow get into you, break through to you, the nature of your mind. That's the definition in our tradition, at least, of a guru. That wisdom that they transmit is the wisdom of all Buddhas of the 3 times. Whether you like your guru, don't like your guru, whether they please you or irritate you, all of this is irrelevant if they get through to you, which requires 2 things. It requires that they be qualified. You can't give what you don't have. And it requires that you be receptive. But if the guru is qualified to transmit this, and you are receptive, and you get it, they have done everything that any Buddha could do. If you get it, there would be nothing more for Buddha Shakyamuni or Guru Rinpoche to say to you. And if you get it, even if you had a vision of Buddha Shakyamuni and Guru Rinpoche, or a billion of each of them, and they said that's not true, you wouldn't buy it, because you'd know. If you don't have that assurance, you didn't get it. Without getting it, what we call getting it, there's simply no way to go on. The only way to go on is to prepare to get it through further purification. And that's why we do purification. That's why we do all of these practices, so that we become receptive to it. Receptivity is not kowtowing. It is not winning the competition for who bows lowest or is the most obsequious person in the room. Receptivity is being willing to admit that your guru knows something that you don't, that you want to know, and being willing to let them tell you. It's very simple, but it's not easy because we are so proud. We think we're not proud. The more we think we're not proud, the prouder we are. We may fool the Sangha, and we may fool ourselves by aping Tibetan customs. Those of us who've been around for a long time have all become very good at that. We may wear chubas or robes like this, and we know what to say, we know how to act. That has nothing to do with receptivity. And if the guru is qualified, you won't fool them. So that's the general sense in which your root guru is the embodiment of all Buddhas of the three times. Then there's a specific sense in which Guru Rinpoche is something historically unique. And we're going to come to that soon. And that's hard to talk about in this culture because, if I may say so, you have very little faith. None of you. Not one of you, and I know many of you well, has the level of faith quite the level of faith that Dzogchen requires. Some of you are getting close. I can say this because I know that, well, I have to. It's my job. I struggle with it. We aspire to faith, and faith has to come from experience. So it's a little bit like you start with a little faith that opens you to a little bit of the truth. You see a little bit of the truth, that increases your faith. Then you see a little bit more, and so on. It works, faith and experience work like walking in the forest. One leg steps and then the other leg steps. But because we start with a burden of not only our own karmic ignorance, but also the tremendous cultural arrogance, we have to work harder at it. We do have to work harder. It's not politically correct to say that. Everybody's equal, sure. I'm not saying that Westerners are inferior to Tibetans, but we do have to work harder because it's harder for us to believe. But Guru Rinpoche is unique. Let's leave it at that for now, and we'll come back to it soon. You are the Guru of Gurus, a second Buddha, as is evident beyond all doubt, both directly and indirectly. In order to inspire future disciples and support practitioners of the many external, internal, and secret Guru sadhanas, means of accomplishing you, taught by you, please bestow such clear guidance on the essential points of generation and completion in deity meditation that just by seeing these instructions, one will understand them. Mahaguru Rinpoche smiled. Although his mind Vajra never moved from indestructible samadhi, he displayed the splendor of the marks and signs of his body Vajra, and with the Brahma-like euphony of his speech, Vajra taught what follows to his common and uncommon retinues, gazing upon them lovingly. Now, before we start to look at Guru Rinpoche's introduction to the teaching, we need to talk a little bit about his tone. As I mentioned, this was transcribed by Yeshe Tsojo. And in her transcription, Guru Rinpoche says, I am the Dharmakaya, I am the Sambhogakaya, I am the Nirmanakaya, I'm the best thing that you could ever, meet. And of course, we know from being around great masters like Barway Rinpoche and others, they don't talk that way. They don't brag. And so for many of us, when we first encounter this, and I dealt with this initially when I was translating this 20 years ago, how do we approach this? Because did Guru Rinpoche really say that about himself? Well, we don't know, and I'm not willing to make unwarranted, opinionated judgments. But certainly, it's possible that the way he said it sounded a little less like bragging than the way it sounds in English. It is possible he literally said it this way because he was talking to people with great faith. I don't know. So Guru Rinpoche's remarks begin. King, ministers, subjects, and awareness-holding yogins and yoginis assembled here, listen one-pointedly without distraction. As my nature is inseparable from the wisdom of all Dharmakaya Buddhas, beyond the intellect, without elaboration, and all-pervasive, I am the Dharmakaya Guru. Well, that is, as grandiose as it sounds, that is an argument. We saw that the definition of a guru is that they have recognized their own Buddha nature so stably that they can teach people how to recognize their Buddha nature, the nature of their mind, Vajra nature, Buddha nature. These are all fundamentally synonymous. So when Guru Rinpoche says, my nature is the Dharmakaya, therefore I'm the Dharmakaya Guru, of course that is true. Everyone's nature is the Dharmakaya. There couldn't be any other nature. If you have a mind, the nature of that mind is Dharmakaya. Nothing else is possible. What Guru Rinpoche is saying is that I know that that's my nature, and therefore I can communicate that to you. So that is not too difficult to understand conceptually. As my character is the unity of luminosity beyond fluctuation, I am the Sambhogakaya Guru. And then he defines this luminosity beyond fluctuation. He says, the character of all Sambhogakayas of the five families who appear from that expanse as the radiance, display, and light of the five wisdoms. Now, again, the mind's nature is Dharmakaya, your mind's nature right now. Everyone's mind's nature, whether we know it or not. The mind's character is luminosity without fluctuation. But what Guru Rinpoche is pointing out here in addition is that in practical terms, he has achieved a stability of recognition of the mind's character such that he experiences it as it is. So when Guru Rinpoche says, I'm the Dharmakaya, I'm the Sambhogakaya, and so on, essentially he's reminding his listeners of two things. Everybody is the Dharmakaya in their nature. Everybody is the Sambhogakaya in their nature. And what makes him distinct is that he's recognized that fact. We may believe it. We may not believe it. But believing it and recognizing it are two different things. And it's very easy to test yourself, to tell whether you have belief, whether you have no belief, or recognition. And this test is very, very traditional. They say the sign of having heard the teachings is to be peaceful and subdued. And the sign of having meditated, which means realized them, is to have very few kleshas. If we're not peaceful and subdued, and I'll use myself as an example of someone who is not peaceful and subdued, I am, to put it politely, a moody bastard. That is not peaceful and subdued. I have barely started to hear the teachings, which means that I don't completely believe them. If I really believed, short of recognition, that my nature was Dharmakaya, with everything that implies, and that my character was Sambhogakaya, by my, I mean my mind's. If I really believed that, I might still have kleshas, but I wouldn't act out. As long as we act out, as long as we have mood disorders, whatever we want to call it, as long as we have those kinds of, problems, internal mental problems, our belief is still kind of sketchy. And the test of whether you have belief or realization, recognition, is your kleshas. If you never act out, you're always appropriate, you're always kind to others, that means that you either believe it or you know it. Then you have to look inside. Are you still a turbulent volcano of hatred, prejudice, jealousy, pride, greed, apathy? If so, you have no recognition. You have not recognized your mind's nature. So this is an internal test that each of us should be running regularly. As without moving, he continues, from the state of those two bodies, I display form bodies which appear like magical illusions, Nirmanakayas conforming to the needs of individual disciples, a compassionate, miraculous, magical display like a water moon, the embodiment of compassion and aspirations no different from those of bodhisattvas. I am the Nirmanakaya Guru. Now, so far, everything he said applies not only to Guru Rinpoche, but also to Barway Rinpoche, to use him as an example. At some point, we don't know when, because he's manifested the achievement of it several times, the being that we call Barway Rinpoche achieved Buddhahood. Perfect Buddhahood. We know this from reading Barway Dorje's autobiography. Unless you don't believe it, in which case I don't know why you're here. Perfect Buddhahood. And then continues to manifest like the moon being reflected in water. So there could be multiple manifestations. And we have to be careful with our limited perspective on what an awakened being is in their manifestation. They are willing to undergo anything. They are willing to take rebirth under any circumstances that will actually help beings. They will undertake the most rebirth under circumstances of horrific difficulty and deprivation if they need to. And the reason is very, very simple. It's not, again, it's not easy, but it's simple. They care more about others than they do about themselves. They care enough to put themselves literally through hell. So they know before they take rebirth, most or all of the crap that's going to be thrown at them. And they do it anyway. And they don't have to. They have a choice. We're not like that. We're here because of karmic compulsion. So the fact that they take rebirth under whatever circumstances are necessary means that they are going to appear very much like us. They're not going to have a 6-foot halo, as the Buddha is said to have had, or have a lump on top of their head that nobody can ever see the top of, like the Buddha. You know, they're going to be a lot like us. And therefore, we're going to look at them and think, oh, they're not so different from me. They have to be not so different from you to communicate with you. But to get petty and fixate on their perceived personal foibles is like complaining about the quality of the water in a pool in which the moon is shining. We are concerned with the moon. The water is just a mirror. The moon just shines in everywhere there's a reflective surface. The moon doesn't care that it might be reflected in a pool filled with bacteria or a muddy pool. It doesn't care whether it's reflected on the surface of the greatest ocean or the smallest puddle formed by a cow's hoofprint. If the moon cared, that would be the selfish behavior of a sentient being. As those three are inseparable in the body of complete awakening, the single nature in which they are all complete, I, the Buddha Padmasambhava, am definitely the guru of that alone. That alone is just a word that means the nature, that, just that. And we call it that because we can't say anything about it. You know, that. Like when you're pointing to something and you don't know its name, you say, what are you pointing at? That. That's what we do, and that's when we talk about the nature of things. Therefore, worthy ones, be free of reservations and doubt, and retain in your minds the meaning of what I am about to say. Now, what follows on page 31 is very important, and people often, they read through this with bewilderment and kind of ignore it because they want to get to, quote, the good stuff. But it's very important because what Guru Rinpoche describes in these couple of pages, and this is why we need to go through this text so slowly, is the relationship between Buddha Shakyamuni's original teaching, what is currently called original Buddhism, or early Buddhism. They keep on coming up. Comparative religion scholars and anthropologists and archaeologists keep on coming up with new titles for it that then we Buddhists object to because we find them. They used to call it primitive Buddhism, and then we said we don't like that. So they say, all right, original Buddhism, and say, well, you're implying that our stuff is not original. So okay, so can we settle on early Buddhism? So now the current term is early Buddhism. The relationship between what the Buddha taught in person and what we practice now. And the link between these two was Guru Rinpoche, and why Guru Rinpoche had to be, why we needed him. So we'll go through it bit by bit. In order to tame those hard to tame, the disciples of the epoch of dispute within this fortunate aeon. Okay. This is a reference to many things in the sutras, but when a long time ago, the Bodhisattva who became Buddha Shakyamuni, well, we don't have to go back that far. Let's just say that at one point before the current, it's hard to know if it's the entire universe or the galaxy or some part of it, but before the world as we know it came into being, devas, what we call the mundane gods, saw that there would be 1,000 Buddhas appearing in this epoch. Epoch here means, could be the duration of the known universe. It could be less than that, but we're talking billions of years anyway. Now, that's not a given. Most epochs don't have Buddhas. They haven't, beings evolve and become intelligent, but nobody ever achieves Buddhahood. And those are called epochs of darkness or aeons of darkness. Some have 10,000 Buddhas, but we have 1,000. 1,000 predicted ones. Barway Dorje is, I think, the 267th or one of them. Buddha Shakyamuni was the 4th. Anyway, I can look that up. And so when they saw this, they said, what a good epoch. And so we call this known time-space, this part of time, space-time, Kalpa Bhadra. Bhadra Kalpa, sorry. The good Kalpa, the good epoch. But within this fortunate aeon, we live in the epoch of dispute. There are broadly speaking, 4 periods in every mega civilization. In other words, not within minor ones, but within mega ones, like a whole species, a whole planetary system. And they correspond roughly to what in European mythology are called the Golden Age, the Silver Age, and so on. They use slightly different terms. But the worst of them is the time of dispute, just where everything is unstable and everything is, you can't take anything for granted. Now, when he first generated bodhicitta, the being that we refer to as the Buddha, the historical Buddha, Buddha Shakyamuni, made the aspiration that he manifest Buddhahood in a place filled with problems. So the time in which the Buddha was born, which doesn't just mean 2,700 years ago, but this whole mess that continues is considered within the context of this greater aeon pretty rough. Worse than most times that actually get Buddhas. So in order to tame those hard to tame, that means that we are hard to tame. As the Buddha himself said, do no wrong at all, do abundant good, totally tame your own mind. That is what the Buddha taught. We call that the fourfold summary of Dharma. We have trouble doing that. Most of us, we think we're Buddhist. We are Buddhist. We've taken the vow of refuge, so that we're, as we'll see, that qualifies us as Buddhists. But we have trouble doing no wrong at all. We quibble. I quibble at every attempt, no matter how benevolent, to restrict my wrongdoing. We think that we're good, and we are good. Basically, we're good. But we think we're doing good if we don't, engage in massive genocide. But by the standards of what we could be, we're still doing quite a bit. And how much good do we really do? Do good, abundant good? Some people do abundant good. I don't. I do what I can, which is not very much. I don't know about anyone else here, but abundant good, that's quite a thing. And then when we get to the third thing, tame your mind. Have we? I haven't. I've been practicing this as best I can, which of course is the whole point, isn't it? My best is not that great. I have been practicing this for almost 50 years. 50 years. I started as a teenager. I did 2 3-year retreats. I practice as much as I can, and I do all this stuff, I translate and whatnot. My mind is not anywhere near tame. Not by the standards of the Buddha who we're supposed to be listening to. So we are hard to tame. So in order to tame those hard to tame, Buddha Shakyamuni, the best of people, the great guide, assiduously cultivated bodhicitta and aspirations in the presence of innumerable Buddhas of fortunate aeons. Throughout 3 periods of innumerable aeons. Innumerable is generally explained in the sutras as as a way of referring to an actual specific number. It's 10 to the power of 60. So if an aeon is the duration of a universe, so let's say we're 14 billion years into this one, so let's give it 30. Let's say it might last for 30 billion years. So that's 10 to the power of 60 times 30 billion years. 3 times of that. Once to reach the first bodhisattva level, another period of 10 to the power of 60 aeons to reach the 8th bodhisattva level, and the final one to reach a Buddha. So throughout 3 periods of innumerable aeons, in this and other worlds, he benefited beings immeasurably, both pure and impure disciples. Finally, in order to take birth in this Jambudvipa, the politically correct way is saying, oh, Jambudvipa is this world. No, Jambudvipa is the Indian subcontinent. It's an old word for South Asia. And by the time that the Kalachakra becomes prevalent, they talk about, well, greater and lesser Jambudvipa. And they say, well, the whole thing's Jambudvipa, but really there's also specific Jambudvipa. But originally, Jambudvipa referred to what we would call, I guess, South Asia, the subcontinent, including Tibet and parts of China and so on. Finally, in order to take birth in this Jambudvipa, he viewed it with a fivefold gaze from the Deva realm of Tushita. Fivefold gaze is the 5 criteria that awakened beings use to decide where and when to be born. And I mean, you can look that up. It's not really that. He passed from that realm to this, entered a womb, was born, played, was educated and trained in external and internal sciences, and behaved as a prince. He then relinquished his kingdom, perfected absorption in samadhi, and achieved manifest Buddhahood as a supreme Nirmanakaya under the tree of awakening in Vajrasana. So that's what history, human history, including generic Buddhist history, says was the Buddha's life up to the time of his awakening, which occurred when he was 36. The point that we're come to now is that that was not the only thing he was doing. But there's much, much more than meets, the way we would say, the eye. At the same time, since that Sugata's 3 secrets, since that Buddha, Sugata means one gone to bliss or well gone, gone like that is another explanation. 3 secrets, body, speech, and mind, were from his point of view in a state inconceivable to us, profound, tranquil, and beyond elaboration. He was the Dharmakaya Samantabhadra Vajradhara in great, densely arrayed Akanishta. Akanishta means the highest. It can be used to refer to realms within samsara, and in this case, a pure realm beyond it. Now, this is very important, as Trungpa Rinpoche used to frequently bring up. People would look at our lineage, like the lineage prayer we chant at the beginning. It starts with Vajradhara and then Talopa and Naropa. In the Guru Rinpoche practices, it starts with sometimes Samantabhadra, sometimes Amitabha, and so on. And they say, well, why is this Buddhism? Where's the Buddha? What about the Buddha? Vajradhara, Samantabhadra are the Buddha, Buddha Shakyamuni. For common disciples, so in the perception of most people, most beings, Buddha Shakyamuni appeared as a human. Siddhartha Gautama, who became Buddha Shakyamuni. At the same time, for bodhisattvas able to experience the Sambhogakaya, he appeared as Vajradhara and has continued to do so, since the Sambhogakaya is not subject to the same limitations as even a Supreme Nirmanakaya. And his nature is what we call Samantabhadra. So at the same time, he was the Dharmakaya Samantabhadra Vajradhara in great densely arrayed Akanishta. His circle or entourage there was the vast expanse, primordially and spontaneously present. Its 5 excellences are beyond our intellect. The Buddha never wavers from that wisdom, the luminous display of which is the realms of the 5 wisdoms, endowed with 5 certain excellences that are not composite, but are great spontaneous presence. The Sambhogakaya certain excellences are the excellent place, which is always Akanishta, the highest pure realm. The excellent teacher, which is always the Sambhogakaya, the body of complete enjoyment. The excellent Dharma, which is always the Mahayana, which includes Vajrayana. The excellent entourage, which always consists of bodhisattvas on the 10 levels. And the excellent time, which means that the time is beyond conventional time. There is a corresponding set of excellences for Nirmanakaya. Once the previous Kala Rinpoche was teaching in New York City in 1982, and he said that the 5 excellences are present here. And he said the excellent Dharma is, what we're sharing here. And he said the excellent place has to be a pure realm because it doesn't change day or night. He was in Manhattan, and he said daytime is like night because of the buildings are so tall. And night is like day because this is the city that never sleeps. And he said the excellent entourage is supposed to consist of Viras and Dakinis, peaceful and wrathful deities. He said, well, you're all peaceful and wrathful deities. He said, when you get what you want, you behave like peaceful deities, and when you don't get what you want, you behave like wrathful deities. And then he said the excellent teacher, it has to be unchanging. And he said, I'm unchanging. I was old before most of you were born. I'm old now. As long as I'm alive, I'll always be old. That's unchanging. Sorry. Anyway, that's blast from the past. The Buddha never wavers from that wisdom. In those realms, he turned the undefiled Dharma chakra of unsurpassable secret mantra for retinues of bodhisattvas. So, in other words, while the Buddha Shakyamuni was teaching what we think of as the common teachings, the teachings common to all Buddhist traditions, and there are arguments about what the Buddha actually said, and scholars keep on arguing about this, that, the other thing, and that's fascinating. But at the same time, he was teaching what we would call Vajrayana to bodhisattvas in this pure reality. Now, how did it get here? If Buddha Shakyamuni taught what we'll call the sutras in India, and taught the Vajrayana only to bodhisattvas in some kind of other reality, whether it's another place or not is a different issue. How did it get into human? Why do we have them? The bodhisattvas known as the lords of the 3 families. So among the bodhisattvas to whom the Buddha taught Vajrayana, 3 of them, Manjushri, Avalokita, and Vajrapani, brought these teachings to sentient beings. Manjushri primarily brought the Buddha's teachings of Tantra to the Devas, gods. Avalokita, generally, primarily brought them to the Nagas. And Vajrapani primarily brought them to human beings. They individually taught the 3 external tantras of secret mantra, Kriya, Charya, and Yoga, according to the recipient's faculties to Devas, Nagas, and humans. At the same time, in this world, in such places as Vulture Peak Mountain. Vulture Peak Mountain is in Rajgir. You can go there. There's a gondola you can take to get to the top. The Buddha turned the Dharma chakras of the 3 vehicles. The first Dharma chakra of the 4 truths, the middle Dharma chakra of the absence of attributes or characteristics, and the third Dharma chakra of full distinction between the indicative and the definitive. Okay. If we leave aside contemporary anthropologists and religious historians' arguments about what the Buddha taught when, what Buddhists say, Mahayana Buddhists. So both the Buddhists of Tibet and the Buddhists of China and the countries that got Buddhism from there, so Japan, Korea, Vietnam, and so on, is that the Buddha's teaching, his ministry, whatever you want to call it, had three distinct periods. He taught from about 49 days after his awakening, when he was 36, and continued to teach until he was 80 or so, as we'll see later on. The first, and generally speaking, they'll say that there was some, intermingling, but basically he taught three phases. In some cases, he would teach one thing and it would be heard in three different ways, but in many cases, these were separate. They'll say they were separate teachings. The first third of the Buddha's teaching we call the Dharma Chakra or Dharma Wheel of the Four Noble Truths. And these are the truth of suffering, the truth of cause, the truth of cessation, and the truth of the path. And these are very important. We can't skip over them because if you don't understand the Four Noble Truths, then everything after that or beyond that won't have any kind of foundation. The basic message was that we are in, to some extent, and I'm going to paraphrase here, obviously, to some extent, we try to be in denial of how much we are suffering. When our denial breaks down, such as when things go wrong or we have internal problems, physical sickness, mental illness, whatever, when things go wrong, then our denial temporarily fails. And then we admit that we're miserable and we're inspired to do something about it. But generally, we remain, even so, in denial of the fundamental cause of suffering, which is that we misapprehend everything. We are wrong about everything. Because we're wrong about one thing. And that one thing, the easiest way to describe it is we believe in the existence of ourselves. We believe that we are who we think we are. You could say we believe our thoughts, although that makes it sound a little superficial, but it's not bad as a definition. Until that's eradicated, happiness is impossible. We can have moments of happiness, which are caused by the ripening of merit accumulated primarily in previous lives. But we're not going to be fundamentally happy as long as we don't deal with the fundamental problem. So much of the first third of the Buddha's teaching was concerned with the identification of causes of suffering, the true causes of suffering, which are karma and kleshas, all of which start with the fixation on the imputed self of persons. And an explanation of the cessation of those causes, and therefore the cessation of suffering, and then how to achieve it, which is the path. The second Dharma chakra which is called here the absence of characteristics, goes further. Because in the first Dhammacakra, while the Buddha specifically and clearly identifies the imputation of a truly existent personal self as the root cause of suffering, and the eradication of that as the cessation of suffering, that alone is not sufficient to enable someone to achieve Buddhahood. If you wish to achieve the state of an arhat, a state of liberation per se, individual liberation, that is enough. But if you wish to achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of others, which the Buddha recommended as a goal, starting with the second Dhammacakra, you need to do even more than that. You need to eradicate not only false imputation of a truly existent personal self, but the false imputation of all inherent attributes to anything. So the way it's put traditionally is the imputation of the klesha veil, which is all the kleshas, which start with the imputation of a personal self, prevent liberation from samsara. But the deeper cognitive veil prevents Buddhahood. And then finally, in the third Dhammacakra, he explained in full the distinction between the indicative and the definitive. Now, the indicative and the definitive are the, I guess you'd call them hermeneutical concepts that we need to understand what the Buddha meant when he said things that sound contradictory. An indicative statement is a statement that will, that is true, well, to put it very, very simply, that is true and useful, but may not mean what it sounds like. That's not the traditional definition. I'm kind of coalescing different concepts here for time purposes. A definitive statement is a statement that is not only true and useful, but also means what it sounds like it means, more or less. These are not, again, this is just practical. For example, when it said, if you say one omene peme hum, you will achieve irreversible Buddhahood. That is an indicative statement. When it said, if you fully recognize the nature of your mind, you will achieve irreversible Buddhahood, that is a definitive statement. Now, what's the difference? They're both true, and they're both useful. You know, the Buddha, in talking about speech, said there should be two or three rules. It should be true, it should be useful, and it should be said as kindly as possible. If you say Wano Mani Pime Hum, you will achieve irreversible Buddhahood, that is true because anyone who says that is caught. The seed has been planted. How long it will take for that to grow depends on what you do. Could take billions of aeons, could take less time. It's indicative because when you hear that, it sounds like it means on the spot. Like if you just say Om Mani Padme Hum, where's that bump? Where's the halo? It doesn't mean that. So for example, when we talk about liberation through hearing, liberation through seeing, liberation through touch, liberation through taste, these mean eventually. But the statement, if you fully recognize your mind's nature, you will achieve irreversible awakening, is definitive because it means what it says. That is the proximate or direct cause of irreversible awakening, whereas saying one Om Mani Padme Hum may be an indirect cause. From time to time, the Buddha discreetly taught internal secret mantra to uncommon individuals, such as bodhisattvas of Mahayana family, Vijayadas among devas, nagas, yakshas, and rakshasas, intelligent kings, queens, and ministers, such as Indrabhuti, and members of the Lichavi clan. Now, the Lichavi clan are famous. The Lichavi are famous in Indian history. If you read about the Lichavis, they're all over the place at that time, between 3,000 and 2,000 years ago. You'll just look them up. Just look them up on Wikipedia, and you can do that. That you can do for yourself. Significant to us is one of them became the Buddha's foremost human transmitter of the Anuyoga Tantra, and that was the Lichavi Vimalakirti. So those of you who remember the 5 chapters, the 5 excellent ones mentioned there, the foremost disciples among yakshas, rakshasas, devas, nagas, and humans. The human was the Lichavi Vimalakirti. And they were the ones who convinced Vajrapani to teach them what he had received from the Buddha. Now, the question remains, so what made these people special? Why did the Buddha teach some people Vajrayana, but not everybody? Aside from that, the culture, time, and circumstances made common disciples unfit for the teaching of more than external pure behavior. Yeah, I could spend a whole weekend on that. External pure behavior. All right. You have to be careful because, this goes out, and then once it's out, it's out. The true, and this is not going to be politically correct, but that's not my job. My job is to be politically incorrect. That's why you asked me to do this. Authentic Vajrayana is messy. If it's nice and neat and you can wrap it up in the pretty bow of your culture of origin, like something you'd see on the Disney Channel, it's not authentic. If you can categorize it, box it up, put it in a nice, neat place, it could be authentic Dharma, but it's not Vajrayana, not the higher Vajrayana teachings. You are going to get your hands dirty. There's no other way. And while we have to, the Vajrayana has very, very strict codes of behavior. That's why it has them. And they're in some ways stricter than those of the lower vehicles, if I can use that term. The way in which they're strict is because of the dangerous terrain you must walk through if you're going to actually do this. Now, those of you who have not done actual Vajrayana practice yet won't know what I'm talking about. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then don't worry about it. If you do know what I'm talking about, then it's an ongoing issue. So Vajrayana cannot be taught where people are, to use a term from our own culture, puritanical. It can't. Even by monastic teachers. Because the teachings themselves are transgressive. The term used in comparative religion, so therefore I can say it's reasonably politically correct, I struggle with that, is transgressive iconography, where the iconography actually transgresses the norms assumed in the tradition itself. And if you don't know what I mean, then you haven't been following the translations in what we chant here. So, and when people say, well, it's not really dangerous, that's not true. It is dangerous. Of course it's dangerous. Medicine is always dangerous, right? Anything that can heal can harm. So anything that heals dramatically, quickly, as Vajrayana is supposed to do, is going to be dramatically dangerous. So in many places, people can't take it. They're just not receptive to it. So aside from that, the culture, time, and circumstances made common disciples unfit for the teaching of more than external pure behavior. Therefore, it was not possible for the Buddha to actually teach the Dharma of unsurpassable secret mantra. That's one reason. Now, what we're talking about here is the reason why Guru Rinpoche had to appear. Now, I'll give you the punchline ahead of the joke. Guru Rinpoche is the rebirth of Buddha Shakyamuni. That's the point being made here. Anyway, we'll get to the details of that. There's another reason. In addition, although his destined lifespan was 100 years, the Buddha passed away at the age of 80 in order to fulfill the request of Mara. Now, I remember when Barway Dorje taught this, one of you, someone who's not here, objected to that and raised a question and said, well, why would the Buddha do what Mara asked? When clearly, I'm rephrasing the question, when clearly it was in his disciples' interest for him to remain alive. And Rinpoche's answer was because Mara asked first. a Buddha's responsiveness to the needs of sentient beings is inconceivable to us. One of the criticisms that Ananda received when Kashyapa, the Buddha's regent, expelled him from the Sangha, was that even though he was the Buddha's attendant, he didn't ask the Buddha to remain alive when the thought first occurred to him. He hesitated, and Mara got there first. And the reason, the karmic reason, why Ananda didn't make that request, and it wasn't ill will on his part, he loved the Buddha. He was the Buddha's, according to some, he was the cousin, some say brother. Anyway, the Buddha's, let's say brother. Tibetans like to say brother, we'll say brother. The Buddha's brother and his closest attendant. Why did Ananda get tongue-tied and not ask the Buddha until Mara did? Because of something called life debt. In a previous life, a long time ago, the Buddha was a captain, a sea captain. And he's usually just called Captain Courageous. And he was transporting 500 merchants to an island of jewels. There's always an island of jewels in these stories. I don't know why. But there was one guy, I think he was one of the 500, or it might have been counted extra, who wanted to kill everybody. And he's usually called Minak Tung Tung Chen, which means bad guy with a spear. I assume that these people didn't have these actual names, you know. I mean, like we refer to the king Ajatashatru, unborn enemy, because there was a prediction he would kill his father, but I'm sure he had another name. I mean, he didn't, you know, it's like, I know, I'll call this man the unborn enemy. But whatever. So the captain was a bodhisattva, had already generated bodhicitta and achieved realization, so he knew. And he thought about the ethical dilemma. There was, the way it's phrased is, there was no way he could stop bad guy with a spear who was going to sink the ship. His spear could, you know, do that kind of thing, except by killing him. Because usually when people say, well, maybe he could have done something else, or, you know, there was no other way to do it. And he thought, if I let him sink the ship and he kills these 500 merchants, he's going to go to hell for a long time. If I kill him, he won't have killed anyone. So he's not going to go to hell. They don't get killed. I'll go to hell. And that's okay. Because I would rather go to hell than him. So Captain Courageous killed bad guy with a spear. Of course, because of his motivation, he did not go to hell, but accumulated great merit and so on and so forth. So because of his aspiration for the benefit of bad guy with a spear was born as his brother Ananda. But even though you were a Buddha, life debt still has to be paid. So, although Ananda bore the Buddha no ill will, he forgot to ask the Buddha to remain alive. And that allowed the Buddha to respond to Mara's request. And he passed away at the age of 80, 20 years before he should have, or would have, otherwise we're told. Therefore, he did not in that life complete the taming of all his disciples. Now, what happens to Buddhas after they pass away? That's a huge topic in Buddhism that we're just going to deal with in a very simple way here. Perfect Buddhas do not again take birth from a human conception. It says from a womb, but that sounds rather misogynistic. It's not that the womb is a problem and the other bits and pieces are not. It's just to take birth from human parents, you have to have the klesha of sexual desire. You have to have a little bit. Even if you're a bodhisattva, we're taught in the sutras, it says, even if you're a bodhisattva taking birth intentionally, there still has to be a little bit of that zing. Otherwise, the stuff isn't going to hit the fan. Buddhas have eradicated all kleshas. So they actually, according to, and there are arguments about how to take this and is this indicative and definitive and so on. We'll leave that out for now. So they can't actually have parents. They can't take physical birth. And this is the problem with arhats. If someone becomes an arhat and then subsequently generates bodhicitta and enters the Mahayana, they have to pursue the path through emanations. They can only be reborn in pure realms because they've eradicated their kleshas. You can't get them back. You can't say, oh, it was wrong, I need that. No, it doesn't work that way. I mean, once you're clean in that sense. The Buddha, however, made several predictions in his final remarks about the continuation of his activity and the teaching of his ultimate and unsurpassable Dharma. He then withdrew the array of his body into the Dharmakaya and Akanishta. Then, urged by his own wisdom, by his aspirations combining the wisdom of all Dharmakayas, and by the light rays of blessing of Amitabha and the other Sambhogakayas, the Buddha emanated light rays, combining into one the compassion and power of all bodhisattvas, such as the aforementioned lords of the three families. Now, this is a very beautiful and very visual image. I'm not going to unpack this in detail because we need to understand that there's pure perception. There are both pure perception and ordinary perception. And different things are, the fact that different beings would perceive the same event differently is not contradictory. So, for example, in the case of Barway Dorje's birth, after the parinirvana of his previous life at Tsumong Monastery, when he chose his parents in the place of rebirth, what happened from the standpoint of pure perception was not the consciousness entering between the ovum and sperm of his parents, but was a ray of light from Nupchen Sanja Yeshe, another ray of light from Yeshe Tsojal, and remember that Rinpoche is the rebirth of both of them, mixing together. And that is what entered the womb. So if you say, well, which was it? It was both. It depends on, your perception. These light rays became a golden 5-pronged vajra marked by a 5-colored tree syllable. The vajra descended onto a lotus stalk on an island in a milky lake in the southwest. Born from it were the 5 Guru Totrings, the entourage of the secret sadhana. Those of you who attended the 5 chapters teaching will know what I'm talking about. Simultaneously, in the billion worlds of this realm, Saha or tolerance, innumerable teachers of sutra and mantra turned the holy Dharma chakras. Now, this can get very complicated because this is from a Dzogchen point of view where there is Sambhogakaya and Nirmanakaya, and then there's a transition or something that's a mixture that's called semi-Sambhogakaya, Chinam Kruku, semi-Nirmanakaya. So, for example, the Buddha Amitabha, we think of as Sambhogakaya, but in fact, the Sukhavati into which you can be reborn is classified as pure Nirmanakaya. Otherwise, you couldn't be born there. Sambhogakaya is only experienced as self-appearance, not even the pure appearance of others, per se, according to the higher vehicles. So it's kind of like a reflection of the Sambhogakaya as pure Nirmanakaya. So the 5 Tutrings are that kind of semi-Sambhogakaya. In between the initial Sambhogakaya of the Padma Pema Kuntuchang, they all hold her at the lotus, which is Guru Rinpoche's fundamental Sambhogakaya, and the Nirmanakaya of Padmakara. So when it says Milky Lake in the southwest, and then simultaneously in the billion worlds of this realm, according to longer Dharma biographies of Guru Rinpoche, it means this within Sukhavati. So the Tutrings were first appeared in Sukhavati and then emanated from there to this realm. Now, this billion world system, it's tempting to correlate it with the galaxy, since I guess there are about 15 or 60, I forget, billions of suns anyway, stars, and probably lots and lots of planets. But it's probably a little hasty to make correlations between one description of the universe and another. In any case, traditionally in Buddhism, this sector of time-space has 1 billion inhabited worlds. And it's because, as I mentioned earlier, it's really rough here. It's really kind of like the rough side of town. It's called Saha, which means endurance or tolerance, because there's a lot to put up with. So it's not just this planet that's rough. So while the Tutrings appeared in pure reality, countless teachers of Sutra and Tantra began appearing throughout these billion worlds. Because there is a Buddha in each of them, there's a Karmapa in each of them, there's a Guru Rinpoche in each of them, and so on. Then the Sambhogakayas, the 5 Tutrings, arose above a sun and moon in the calyx of an Udambara flower on an island in Lake Dhanakosha in Uddiyana as the embodiment of the Trikaya. So this is how he actually appeared in this world. His 5 Sambhogakayas, so to speak, coalesced together and appeared on top of Lake Dhanakosha. A supreme Nirmanakaya adorned by the marks and signs, the 32 marks and 80 signs that mark the body of a Buddha or the body of a Chakravartin. From the Ushnisha, the crown protuberance atop the head, to the wheels on the soles of the feet, seated in Vajra posture, forming the earth pressing and even placement mudras. So in other words, when Guru Rinpoche first appeared, he was first perceived in the physical posture of the Buddha. To show, if we interpret this, to show that he was the reappearance of the Buddha. In that way, my miraculous birth was manifest in the common experience of all devas and humans. This happened exactly when the victor had predicted it would. Now, I suppose we need to address this. In longer Dharma biographies of Guru Rinpoche, autobiographies, such as the wish-fulfilling tree, the good wish-fulfilling tree, which is a part of the 7 profound cycles, which is a Dharma of Chokcha Dechen Lingpa, of whom one of the destined heirs was Barway Dorje, and who received the Yamanta, who became the holder of the Yamantaka cycle from that. There's also, of course, a Kila cycle that is celebrated in all main Karma Kagyu monasteries every second year. In that autobiography, Guru Rinpoche addresses this issue of, well, if he wasn't born in the usual way, in other words, conception and then, 9 months in the womb and so on, what happened? What really happened? And he says that it actually depends upon your reality. He said, in the reality of some, I was born as the son of a minister of Udayana and adopted into the royal family. In the reality of others, I was born as the son of the king, so I wasn't adopted. In the reality of some, I appeared on top of a hill from a bolt of lightning. And the reality of some, I appeared all at once on top of a lotus flower that grew on an island in the middle of this lake, Dhanakosha. We think that, I believe that at one point, the government of the Kingdom of Bhutan was arranging with the government of Pakistan for pilgrimage, safe pilgrimage rights to Dhanakosha, the lake, because it had been recognized. This was many years ago. I heard about this. So I don't know if that still exists. But anyway, I guess at least some Vajrayana practitioners believe they've identified where this happened. So, how did Guru Rinpoche first appear? It depends on who you are, and it's good to I would say to be open-minded about it. I know that people have a hard time. Westerners have a hard time with this. I mean, I am one, right? So I can talk about Westerners as a group. We don't believe in what we haven't seen. We're very somehow the stretching of the limits of perception by science has made us even more rigid in many cases. So we say, all right, I'll accept that because Einstein said so. Well, it doesn't make sense, but I'll believe it. But then we're going to be rigid. We transfer our rigidity, the same rigidity which probably caused people to think that the world was flat, that, we transfer it to anything that doesn't make sense to us. So I just suggest keeping an open mind. That's as far as I'll take that. So this happened exactly when the victor had predicted it would. The exact year of Guru Rinpoche's appearance is given variously in different sources, and therefore the length of his life or time in India is dated in different ways. I'm not going to dwell on that because our text doesn't require it. So at this point, what has been, to summarize before we break for lunch, What Guru Rinpoche is basically saying here by way of introduction, and this is important because these practices are about him personally, is that in some way, Guru Rinpoche was born through the direct aspiration of Buddha Shakyamuni. You can think of him as the embodiment of the ripening of the Buddha's aspiration. You can think of him as the Buddha returning. Those may sound like two very different things, but they're not. They might not be. But the point that he's made up to this point, up to this, and we've managed to get through 2 pages, is that Guru Rinpoche appeared in that time and place, whenever exactly it was and wherever exactly it was, in order to continue what the Buddha had started. And that's the first, we could say the first major point that's made in this text. To conclude for this morning, we'll chant the single stanza, dedication, on the top of the 2 stanzas on page 7, the top one. Nam de ye lam je ze hanye done ye pe ranam lam je chenga na je bala drumaye seme Thank you. We start again at 2.